Chapter 2. Quote, "For a long time I used to go to bed early." End quote. By Marcel Proust. I arrived back at the flat and went through the usual answer phone routine. 2 meaningless beeps, 1 wrong number, 1 call from a friend interrupted in the first sentence, followed by 3 people I didn't want to hear from, who I now had to ring back. God, I hate that machine. I sat down at my desk and went through the day's mail. I threw some bills into the bin and remembered that I'd moved the bin into the kitchen. So I got annoyed, stuffed the rest of the post in a drawer, and gave up on the idea that doing chores would help me to get things straight in my mind. It was too late to start playing loud music, and the only other entertainment I could find in the flat was whiskey. So I picked up a glass and a bottle of the famous grouse, poured myself a couple of fingers, and went into the kitchen. I added enough water to turn into just a vaguely familiar grouse, and then sat down at the table with a pocket dictaphone, because someone had once told me that talking out loud helps clarify things. I'd said, would it work with butter? And they said, no. But it would work with whatever's troubling your spirit. I'd put the tape in the machine and flicked on the record switch. Dramatis personae, I said. Alexander Wolf, father of Sarah Wolf, owner of Dinky Georgian House in Lisle Street, Belgravia, employer of blind and vindictive interior designers, and chairman and chief executive officer of Gain Parker. Unknown male, Caucasian, American or Canadian, 50-ish, Rayner, large, violent, hospitalized. Thomas Lang, 36, flat D, 42 Westbourne Close, late of the Scots Guard, honourable discharge with rank of captain. The facts, insofar as they are known, are these. I don't know why tape recorders make me talk like this, but they do. Unknown male attempts to secure employment of T. Lang for the purpose of committing unlawful killing of A. Wolf. Lang declines position on grounds of being nice, principled, decent, a gentleman. I took a mouthful of whiskey and looked at the dictaphone, wondering if I ever was going to play this soliloquy back to anyone. An accountant had told me it is a sensible thing to buy because I could get a tax back on it. But, as I didn't pay any tax, having any need for a dictaphone, or trust the accountant as far as I could spit him, I looked upon this machine as one of my less sensible purchases. Hi-ho. Lang goes to Wolf's house with intention of warning him against possible assassination attempt. Wolf, absent. Lang decides to investigate inquiries. I paused for a while, and the while turned into a long while. So I sipped some more whiskey and laid aside the dictaphone while I did some thinking. The only inquiry I had investigated had been the word "what," and I'd barely managed to get that out of my mouth before Rayner had hit me with a chair. Beyond that, all I'd done was half kill a man and leave, wishing pretty fervently that I'd other half killed him too, and you don't really want that sort of thing lying around on a magnetic tape, unless you know what you're doing. Which, amazingly enough, I didn't. However, I'd just about known enough to recognize Rayner, even before I knew his name. I couldn't say he'd been following me exactly, but I have a good memory for faces, which makes up for being utterly pathetic with names. And Rayner's was not a difficult face. Heathrow Airport, the public bar of some Devonshire Arms on the King's Road, and the entrance to Leicester Square Tube had been enough of an advertisement, even for an idiot like me. I'd had the feeling that we were going to meet eventually, so I'd prepared myself for the rainy day by visiting Blitz Electronics on Tottenham Court Road, where I shelled out £2.80 for a foot of large diameter electrical cable, flexible, heavy, and when it comes to beating off brickheads and footpads, better than any purpose-built cosh. The only time it doesn't work as a weapon is when you leave it in the kitchen drawer, still in its wrappings. Then it's really not very effective at all. As for the unknown male Caucasian who'd offered me a killing job, well, I didn't hold out much hope of ever tracing him. 2 weeks ago, I'd been in Amsterdam, escorting a Manchester bookmaker who desperately wanted to believe that he had violent enemies. He hired me to bolster the fantasy. So I held car doors open for him, and checked buildings for snipers that I knew weren't there, and then spent a grueling 48 hours sitting with him in nightclubs, watching him throw money in every direction but mine. When he'd finally wilted, I ended up loafing about my hotel room, watching blue movies on the television. The phone had rung, during a particularly good bit, as I remember, and a male voice had asked me to the bar for a drink. I checked to make sure that the bookmaker was safely tucked up in bed with a nice warm prostitute, then sidled downstairs in hope of saving my 40 quid by wringing a couple of drinks out on my old army friend. But, as it turned out, the voice on the phone belonged to a short fat body in an expensive suit who I definitely didn't know, and didn't particularly want to know either, until he reached into his jacket and pulled out a roll of banknotes as thick as I am. American banknotes, exchangeable for goods and services at literally thousands of retail outlets worldwide. He pushed $100 bill across the table to me, so I spent 5 seconds quite liking the little chap. And then, almost immediately, love died. He gave me some background on a man named Wolf, where he lived, what he did, why he did it, how much he did it for. And then he told me that the banknotes on the table had 1,000 little friends who would find their way into my possession if Wolf's life could be discreetly brought to an end. I had to wait until our part of the bar was empty, which I knew wouldn't take long. At the prices they were charging for liquor, there were probably only a couple of a dozen people in the world who could afford to stick around for a second drink. When the bar had cleared, I leaned across to the fat man and gave him a speech. It was a dull speech, but even so, he listened very carefully, because I'd reached under the table and taken hold of his scrotum. I told him what kind of man I was, what kind of mistake he'd made, and what he could wipe with his money. And then we'd parted company. That was it. That was all I knew, and my arm was hurting. I went to bed. I dreamt of a lot of things that I won't embarrass you with, and ended up imagining that I was having to hoover my carpet. I kept hoovering and hoovering, but whatever was making the mark on the carpet just wouldn't go away. Then I realized that I was awake, and that the stain on the carpet was sunlight, because someone had just yanked open the curtains. In the twinkling of an eye, I whipped out my body into a coil, taut, come and get it crouch, the electrical cable in my fist, and bloody murder in my heart. But then I realized that I dreamt that too, and what I was actually doing was lying in bed, watching a large, hairy hand very close to my face. The hand disappeared, just leaving a mug with steam coming out of it, and the smell of a popular infusion, sold commercially as PG Tips. Perhaps in that twinkling of an eye I'd worked out that the intruder who wants to slit your throat don't boil the kettle and open the curtains. Time is it? 35 minutes past the hour of 8. Time for your shreddies, Mr. Bond. I pulled myself up from the bed and looked over at Solomon. He was as short and cheerful as ever, with the same ghastly brown raincoat that he bought from the back pages of the Sunday Express. I take it you've come to investigate a theft? I said, rubbing my eyes until the white dots of light started appearing. What theft would that be, sir? Solomon called everyone sir, except his superiors. The theft of my doorbell, I said. If you are, in your sarcastic fashion, referring to my silent entrance to these premises, then may I remind you that I am a practitioner of the black arts, and practitioners, in order to qualify for the term, have to practice. Now, be a good lad and jump into some kit, will you? We're running late.